What's going on, everybody? Welcome in to a windy, rainy, and snowy, perhaps, Thursday night game here. Nice divisional matchup, Steelers-Browns, so could be an exciting game from a football perspective, even if we don't have a ton of scoring. Prop, how are you feeling about tonight's game?
I need the coffee already. I feel like it's going to be the morning time all over again. It's not going to be a lot of action to see. I'll need a little extra boost.
Yeah, I'm with you there. Might have some more unders than usual for tonight's game, so we'll see how we do there in the prop market. But TwoGun, how are you feeling about this one?
You know, when I first saw that this was a Thursday night game, I was like, "Oh shit!" Like, really. I do feel like I have a strategy for tonight's game. Doesn't mean it's a good strategy, but I have a strategy. We'll see if it works.
I will say, I can't remember exactly what year it was. Might have been 2 years ago, maybe even 3 at this point. One of my biggest showdown hits ever in NFL DFS was a Browns-Steelers game where there was a lot of weather concerns, so everyone was going to the running game, and I just played the passing stacks. I think it was Jacoby Brissett, Amari Cooper, and David Njoku with Cooper as the captain. Turned out really well, so maybe we take a similar stance on this one, but we'll talk showdown after we hit on some props. So, PropGod, why don't you kick us off? What's your favorite pick of the night here?
Yes, sir. Going back to old reliable Jaylen Warren. It's always good in my book. We're going to go back to the rush attempts. It's boosted up a little bit from where it was when I last took it, but caught it at over 8.5 on FanDuel. I'm not sure where it's at on DFS. I don't like the 9.5. I feel like 10 will be sharp, but 8.5 I think is a great spot, especially for the weather. We're looking at winds between 10 to 20 miles per hour, rain and snow in the forecast. So real AFC North football. We know the Steelers run the ball at the highest rate in the NFL, and the Browns have been pretty bad against the run, especially as of late, dealing with some injuries on that defensive front. Cleveland is allowing the 6th most yards per carry as well. I think about 4.6 yards per carry. So I see a heavy dosage of the running backs tonight for Pittsburgh. So I'll kick it off with Warren.
Underdog, unfortunately, doesn't have rush attempts. They do. It's really weird. They don't have rush attempts, and yet they give us 2.5 rushing plus receiving first downs. They give us longest rush. So my guess is that means that the rush attempts are just down for a few minutes, and they will come back. They were maybe getting a lot of attention from people, so Underdog just takes some stuff down, sometimes reevaluate it, and then put it right back. So this might come back. If it doesn't, is there anything else of Warren's that's really catching your eye?
Yeah, the 49.5 rushing plus receiving yards.
Cool. I like that. I'll just momentarily put that one in for us. TwoGun, why don't you give us your first pick?
I guess let's go with Russell Wilson over 190.5 passing yards. That's what I'm seeing on pick 6 right now. I think it's also a great showdown play to be on Russell Wilson as a pivot off of the very, very chalky Najee Harris. Mm-hmm. And kind of like you're saying, this game, it's gross, but I don't know if it's like that gross to where I don't like kickers at all in this game, but I do think they'll still be able to throw the ball some. And they're still going to play a football game. So I kind of think our simulator tool loves Russell Wilson over here. Mm-hmm. And he's been pretty good, and I just think this Browns team has been really terrible against the pass, and people are ignoring that because they just sort of focus on the weather and focus on the Steelers being like a teeny tiny favorite, 3.5 points, not a massive favorite by any means. The Steelers could easily find themselves behind in this game and forced to throw the football.
Yeah, I like this one. We have them projected at 229 passing yards, and that's after I manually brought down the expected pass rate, by the way, for this weather. So I'm with you, and I also think the 34.5 longest completion is very interesting in his 4 games, 44, 43, 34, and 37 for his longest. And then Cleveland playing a ton of single high coverage, the most in the league. They've also been near the top in explosive passes allowed because of how much single high they play, which brings us perfectly into my favorite pick of the night. George Pickens, longest reception. We've been going to this like crazy this season, particularly once Russell Wilson took over, only 25.5 for his longest completion. He has been automatic on this one. He's hit in every single game that Russell Wilson has played. And for him, it's basically been the same number. Remember what I just mentioned for Russell Wilson, 44, 43, 34, 37? Guess what? Those were all George Pickens for the longest reception, Pittsburgh. So he's been the guy. The thing I love about this, it's not just how much single high coverage that Cleveland has played and Pickens has dominated against single high. It's also, we've seen Pickens do this in the past. He'll take a quick slant and, most receivers are going to get 8 yards, 12 yards on the play, but he's so damn fast and athletic that if he beats his guy by just enough, now he's extending it, kind of like the Nico Collins 33-yarder that we hit with the other night. These guys are so talented. They can turn those shorter plays into the explosive play. So knowing how much single high Cleveland usually plays and now expecting them to play even more because of the weather, because the expectation is that Pittsburgh just wants to run the ball over and over and over again in this game. I love this one for Pickens. Prop, do you like this number right where it is, or are you looking to even ladder this all the way up?
So it being 25.5 is a bit interesting. I kind of like him. I would play him up to maybe about 35. That 40 is a bit sharp, but the 29.5, I'm not mad at that. Because when he's going over, he's catching about 30 plus. So I would take it up to the 29.5.
One other thing I'll mention about this is it's not just that he has the 4 straight games with Russell Wilson over, but in several of those games, he's had multiple receptions over the 25.5 number, and yet he hasn't gone over 44 yards. So I think this is one where I'm actually happy to just leave it at 25.5. Certainly good with the 29.5 at 1.31x as well. But I don't feel the need to go to 49.5 because so many of these plays that they're hitting on are when they get not necessarily into the red zone, but into an area where defenses are less concerned about the explosive play. We've seen a lot of those teardrop passes that Russell Wilson drops in there, and they seem to be consistently at the 30 to 35 yard mark. So I'm less intrigued about these latter numbers as I am just thinking 25.5 is an absolute smash play here. So TwoGun, only other question here is we do run into some correlation issues. We're dropping from 6x to 5.4x with the Russell Wilson over on yards and this George Pickens longest reception. Do you mind going from 6 to 5.4? Personally, I think that's not a large enough penalty for me to really care about it, but curious what your thoughts are there.
No. Sometimes you just have to eat it. Come on. If you like Russell Wilson, how do you hate George Pickens?
Right.
Just know, he's such the alpha wide receiver on that team that, if you're having Russell Wilson in your DFS line, you almost certainly have to have George Pickens in. So no.
I think another way of thinking about it is just it's extremely likely that Russell Wilson goes over if George Pickens doesn't have at least a 26-yard reception. So I'm with you there. Prop, why don't you take us to your second pick?
Yeah, next I'm going to go to another running back. That's pretty much my premium for the night. Jerome Ford over 1.5 receptions. I don't know if Underdog has it. Let's see.
They don't. They have 14.5 receiving yards though.
I'm not mad at that. I like the reception number better because we don't care about how many yards he gets. If long as he gets the catches. Looking at the Steelers, giving up the 4th most receiving yards from running backs. So I'm not mad at it. And the 6th most receiving yards from running backs, and the 10th most receptions at 5.8. And Chubb is not really using the passing game like that. So I guess we can go with the receiving yards. I definitely don't. I like his rush attempts, but not his yards. So let's go with the receiving yards. The reason being is because of the weather. I'm thinking of it like this. When you're facing the Steelers, it's already hard to get the ground game going. We saw Derrick Henry have trouble getting going, but Justice Hill will have an impact on that game. Yep. So you get your running back involved in a passing game the same way Rico Dowdle was able to get involved against the Steelers. In a receiving game. So that's what I'm expecting for Ford tonight. You got Chubb, who had an ACL tear. Slippery conditions. It may not be the best for him to be out there for a full workload while he's still recovering back to full strength. I think a lot of people probably are not considering that. So I'm kind of high on Ford tonight.
TwoGun, I'm going to go to my second pick before I go to you for yours, because my second pick works extremely well with this Jerome Ford pick. It is Jameis Winston under 8.5 rushing yards. And part of this is the Pittsburgh pass rush is so good and TJ Watt is so scary to opposing quarterbacks that they like to get the ball out of their hands quickly. They like to check down. The evidence of that, not only did Lamar Jackson have 0 scrambles a week ago against Pittsburgh, Pittsburgh has allowed the fewest scramble yards in the entire league, which we can see through Stats Hub. For anybody who doesn't know how to find those, you go into the rushing, you use the advanced filter, go to rush concepts and set scramble to true. And then you can just sort by the defensive yards allowed. So would either of you, I'll start with you, Prop, would you like to guess how many scramble yards Pittsburgh has allowed on the entire season?
This is week 12, so they played 11 games for the entire season. Let's say 15 yards a game. 180.
How about you, TwoGun?
I have no clue.
Give a ballpark number.
Like I'm in school and I'm cheating off his homework. I'm like, oh yeah, 180. That sounds about right. Yeah.
The answer is 15.
15 scramble yards?
15 scramble yards for the entire season. Lamar Jackson had no scrambles against them. And I watched some of the Lamar film last week, because when I saw that number, I thought, that's insane. Like, how is this possible? They are so incredibly disciplined with their pass rushes. They always have some guy in like every escape hole. And like I said, a lot of it is just about the quarterbacks. Like, you can tell that every quarterback is afraid of TJ Watt, and he doesn't want to just be messing around in the pocket and trying to find an escape route, because he knows eventually TJ Watt is going to get to me. He's going to murder me. I'm going to lose a fumble. I got to get rid of the ball. So some of these quarterbacks typically, like, they see an escape route and they say, no, not in this one. I got to get rid of the ball. Lamar also had a couple instances where it looked like he escaped to the outside, was going to have a big run, and then a safety comes flying in. So they are just it's not just Lamar. Like, I'm sure that they were especially prepared to contain the Lamar scrambles, but this seems to just be who they are. They're incredibly disciplined in the way that they rush the passer. They don't give these escape routes. Jameis Winston, by the way, he had 5 rushes for 32 yards against the Chargers. That was an aberration. Ever since 2021, he just doesn't really scramble. Most of his attempts rushing are either QB sneaks or QB kneel downs. So under 8.5 here, I think is a fantastic play, particularly because of the matchup, but I think it would be good in a neutral matchup regardless. So TwoGun, what do you think of this one?
I mean, that sounds like probably our best pick in terms of pure likelihood to win. You know, I think it's one of those things where, like, they just kind of throw that number up there. And
yeah, and it's one of those where, like, of course it can fail, because it could just be one run for Jameis, and then you think, like, oh, well, that sucks. But I feel like if this game were played 10 times, he's going to scramble. Like, he's going to scramble in fewer than half of them. So we're already good. And then there's also, of course, the instance that maybe he scrambles and doesn't get to 8.5. So yeah, I'm with you. I think it's a really high probability play. Why don't you take us to your final one and round out this sick pick play?
Well, it goes well with the passing on the Steelers, and that's Najee Harris under his rushing yards.
Mm-hmm.
Again, I just think everyone's way too set in their minds that they're just the Steelers are going to run in this game and they're going to control the clock and control the entire game with their massive 3.5 point favorite. Like, no, our tool has them at 69.75, so that's like 5 yards under. And I just think if it's just a lot to expect for a running back in a timeshare to do more than 75 rushing yards in a game. It's just a lot.
Yeah. Prop, I imagine you like this one too, because the more Jalen Warren is involved in getting to his number, obviously the less Najee Harris can do himself.
Yeah, well, I wouldn't necessarily say I like it, but I didn't. I thought the line was sharp. I do have Najee on the SGP and VIP, but it's well under 70. I got him for 50 plus. So
yeah,
I'm not mad at that, and I know TwoGun has that trend of fading the public, so I know the chat probably will get upset shortly. All their Najee ladders. So yeah, I'm not mad at it though. I'm a Warren fan when it comes to the Steelers. So
Yeah. The other thing I'll point out is, the standard payout is 25x. We're still getting over 22x on this one, and we have a lot of positive correlation here. We've got Russell Wilson and George Pickens, of course. We also have the Warren receiving yards, so that could help Russell Wilson as well. And then we have the really nice correlation with the over on Warren, the under on Najee Harris, and the correlation between Jameis checking the ball down instead of scrambling. So I think we're getting a really, really good number here on 22x. Any closing thoughts here in the Prop World PropGod?
what are your thoughts on Jameis over 3.5 sacks taken? Miles Garrett gave TJ Watt a little extra motivation, running his mouth a little bit in the interview about TJ's response to not winning Defensive Player of the Year. So I for sure like TJ to get a sack, but this Pittsburgh pass rush has been pretty good in moments.
Yeah, I'm with you. Did you say 3.5?
I'm sorry, 3.0. 3.0. He
Okay,
just
yeah,
got
I was going to say it's even better there. In his games, he took 2, 6, and 3 sacks. I think the biggest concern that I have with it is he's dropped back 41, 46, and 46 times. Actually, he's thrown 41, 46, and 46 passes in his 3 starts. So the sack rate isn't quite as high as the total volume of sacks he's taken suggests. But he also hasn't faced a pass rush quite like Pittsburgh. So I would definitely lean to the over here. I wish that we could actually boost this up to 3.5 and get a better payout on it. What do you think here, TwoGun?
I don't know. It's not like something I really think about. Sacks,
Yeah, you don't like to think about defenses for DFS anyway, so you're really not thinking about sacks.
It's like 1 point. It's like 1 point for sacks.
Right.
The Warren's rush attempts are an underdog now, but it's 0.89x.
I like that. All right. Let's see here. Let me run something real quick for Zach. Okay. All right. Let's see. Look at that. Locking in Jerome Ford receiving yards right before we went live.
His receptions are on underdog now too. Both of the plays that I was talking about.
Awesome. There's a chance, by the way, that for whatever reason, I'm just not seeing some of the picks. We noticed this earlier on my stream with Zach that for whatever reason, like on my desktop, I'm not seeing all of the picks that I'm seeing on my phone. So as we go through all of these, it's worth noting that just because you don't see it on my screen doesn't mean that it's not actually available. I'm still not seeing Ford, but let me check my phone because I don't know what's going on with it, but it might just be because I'm in Pennsylvania instead of my usual Virginia for a couple days. Let's see. Jerome Ford. Yeah, so I see him on my phone at 1.5 receptions, 0.79x, and then 2.57x for 3.5 receptions. They didn't give 2.5, interestingly, but what do you think of that one, Prop? Do you like the 3.5, or are you just more comfortable with the 1.5?
So I like it. I think he covered last week.
Mm-hmm.
Let me fact check that. Yeah, he did. He got 4, and usually when he goes over, he gets 3. He's got a game with 6, 7, and then 4. I can see him getting that. Just Jameis is a risk taker too. So, but I think the weather will kind of limit what these guys want to do. Take those vertical shots, and it's gonna
I think one other point in Ford's favor is, Nick Chubb is coming off a major injury, and they just played 4 days ago. So if Ford is mixed in a little bit more than we're used to seeing on early downs, there's a good chance Cleveland says, all right, well, when Chubb is on the field on early downs, we'll run the ball. When Ford is on the field, let's dial up a few more pass attempts. So I think these 4 numbers are solid across the board. All right, guys, let's jump in to some showdown stuff, and I will bring up the Captain Optimals. TwoGun, why don't you kick us off? What are like your main thoughts about the showdown? What do you expect people to do? What are your main paths to leveraging the field? And then with all of that said, who's your favorite captain?
So I think in general, everyone is thinking Steelers rushing with Najee Harris, and then Browns throwing the ball. Maybe Jameis, but often, Njoku or Jerry Jeudy or whatever. Let's see if we can bring up the. I'm gonna look at the optimize real fast and look at the look at the percentages. But my thought is I generally like Steelers passing this game and Browns rushing. And to me, the actual most under-owned player is going to be Nick Chubb. Basically, 25% projected ownership, 0% captain ownership almost, because he hasn't had a decent game yet.
Yeah.
He's generally getting around 12 to 15 carries. He doesn't have a touchdown. The game script has been terrible for the Browns. They didn't use him as much as Sunday, partly to rest him because they, against the game Thursday, plus they're getting blown out. And I understand he's not going to get 30 touches. It's just not going to happen. But this isn't a main slate. I'm not trying to pick the player with the biggest ceiling on a main slate out of all the running backs. I'm looking at just this game. And if Nick Chubb is the one that gets a touchdown and he gets like 80 yards or something like that, he could easily be like the slate breaker in this thing. And the other one I like, obviously, I like Steelers passing, so like Russell Wilson and I like George Pickens. That's a little bit more chalky, although I feel like Russell Wilson isn't nearly as chalky as he should be. So I'm going Steelers passing, Browns rushing, using Nick Chubb, but I'm also going to use another Brown or two, generally like a random wide receiver or whatever.
Yeah, I like this. I think when we discuss our showdown ideas, number one, like we usually don't discuss them ahead of time. So we never know what we're going to agree on. And I think oftentimes we're either in lockstep, we disagree, or every now and then we bring up an idea and the other guy goes, oh, damn, that sounds kind of good. And this is one of those. I was not considering a Nick Chubb captain, but I think everything you said is true. And I can simultaneously not love his props, but also really like him as a captain. And I'd also say I'm either going to use Chubb as a captain or not at all, because when he hits, it's likely because he actually does break off a long run. It's likely because, it's not just what he's doing. It's that the overall offensive production in the entire game is low. So that one big run that Chubb has is like a big piece of the overall fantasy points in the game. So I really like this call. It's super contrarian. It's not something our Sims like, by the way, but that's also because Pittsburgh has been really good at preventing the explosive run. And so this is basically just a bet on Nick Chubb's talent and the fact that we have seen him break off explosive touchdown runs his entire career, regardless of the matchup. PropGod, what do you think of this call on Chubb's upside?
I'm not mad at it, and I will love it for my fantasy team because he hasn't done anything for me this season. So,
so true.
One thing I wanted to kind of extend on Alex that you said is you don't have to like his props. You like this in Showdown. If you look at his props, like let's look at pick 6. He has 53.5 rushing yards. He has 60.5 rushing plus receiving yards. That's only 23.5 less than Najee Harris. One guy's going to be 25% owned. The other guy's going to be like damn near 90% owned. And it's a 20-yard difference.
Yeah.
You can have a very like meh view on his props because
that's a great call.
The fact that the props are this high goes to show that DraftKings and all these places are like, I don't know, man, they're probably going to try to feed Nick Chubb here. So, whereas the public doesn't think they're going to feed Nick Chubb. So to me, it's like a smart dumb money thing on how people expect from Nick Chubb, and it's just to me it's a much better showdown play than it is a prop play.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Another thing I'll say in Chubb's favor here: Pittsburgh 16th in adjusted line yards allowed, 21st in open field yards allowed. Both of those stats are per rush, and so. When you're looking at most of the Pittsburgh numbers, when you're looking at the explosive runs and the explosive rushing yards allowed, they're low, but in large part they're low because Pittsburgh just doesn't face a ton of runs because they've been playing with the lead so often in games. But the uglier this game gets, even if Cleveland hasn't been putting up points, as long as they're not down by 1 million, they're going to keep trying to run the ball with Chubb. So that chance that he breaks off that one run that turns him from out of all optimal lineups, even as a flex option, to the optimal captain goes way, way up with each additional carry. So I think this is a really cool, really unique captain call, and it might even make me make a second lineup tonight just to make sure that I have exposure to it if it's not my absolute favorite build. PropGod, how about your thoughts on this game? Do you have a favorite captain of your own?
Man, if I had to go with a captain, I'm not too sure. Just because of the weather, honestly. I just don't know the angle, because usually when you get games like this, right, when it's a weather concern, it comes out and the weather is not a problem at all. And that's kind of what I'm leaning towards, which is why I like your Pickens look, and I like TwoGun with the Russell Wilson passing look too. So if I had to go with a captain, honestly, with the workload that Pickens is getting, I want to go with him.
I think that's my thought too. Not simming super great in our optimals, as you can see on the screen, but I like the idea, kind of as I alluded to right off the bat of the show, of just saying everyone's afraid of the weather, but teams still throw when the weather is bad, and defenses know that the opponent wants to run the ball more, so they play more vulnerable coverages to those big passing plays. And obviously, we have talked about it a ton, not just on this show, but basically every single time we're covering a Pittsburgh game. George Pickens is the big play guy. So in the same way we talked about, Nick Chubb can have that one play in the game that makes him optimal. Same is obviously said about Pickens. So I think I'm with you, Prop, that Pickens is my favorite captain. Although I also find it pretty noteworthy that Russell Wilson, almost at the exact same optimal percentage as George Pickens, and obviously projected for significantly lower captain ownership. TwoGun, let me kick it to you on this one. I'm assuming that that's because, number one, Russell Wilson likes to spread the ball around, but it's also because Wilson's touchdowns have often gone to not Pickens, and it's a backup tight end that's still not going to be optimal, or it's Jaylen Warren on a screen, or it's the only time he targets Mike Williams in the entire game. So are you with the Sims here saying, hey, Russell Wilson's pretty under-owned as the captain, or are you saying, you know what, I know what the Sims are saying, but my intuition also tells me that when Russell Wilson does well, it's largely because of George Pickens, so I'll just go to Pickens as the captain.
Well, I kind of just went with Sims. Right now I have two lineups, one with Russell Wilson captain and run with Nick Chubb captain. And Nick Chubb's in both lineups, so I might add. I just feel like it's how you build your lineup. If you have Russell Wilson as your captain, you don't want to have Najee Harris.
Yep.
You can have Jaylen Warren, and you're going to want to have at least two or three pass catchers, because the idea he spreads the ball around, maybe he even rushes it in. So I don't know. I like it. I'm just kind of going with it there. But when I have quarterback at captain, there's like, if I have a wide receiver as captain, he's probably just the only wide receiver. Often he's the only wide receiver. In this case, if I'm having Russell Wilson as captain, I'm having two or three pass catchers, and I could include Jaylen Warren as a pass catcher.
Yeah.
In this sort of thought process.
Yeah, I agree with that. When you have Russell Wilson, are you going Calvin Austin, one of the tight ends, Mike Williams? What's your thought?
It doesn't really matter which one. I'm going to have George Pickens, but I'm going to have at least one, probably two of those guys and Jaylen Warren. And I'm not going to have Najee Harris at all.
I like it.
If I'm having Najee Harris in a lineup with Russell Wilson, then I'm probably putting Pickens as my captain.
Prop, you mentioned that this Cleveland run defense hasn't been as strong of late, and not just Taysom Hill, but we saw it with J.K. Dobbins the week prior. The way they're getting beat is with explosive runs. So I know you're on Jaylen Warren for the props, but are you every bit as high on Jaylen Warren here in Showdown?
Yeah, I like him. I actually, shout out to Underdog. I just started a streak. I'm gonna try it for the first time. And nice. I put the receiving yards for both Warren and Ford on there. So we'll see how that goes. And for the listeners, if they want to rock out with that, I'll take both of the overs for the streak. But yeah, DFS wise lineup, I like Warren. Because I think that receiving game, I feel like he's more explosive than Najee Harris, of course. Definitely, so he can get explosive in the receiving game on the screen or on the ground.
Are you giving him some consideration as a captain, or are you just thinking you're going to play him as a flex?
When you first asked me, I thought about the captain. I know he hasn't had a captain-like game this season, but yeah, that's what we're here for. We're trying to get ahead of the market and predict moments like that. Yeah. And I really do feel like this could be it, especially with so many people loving Najee. So I wouldn't be mad at it, but it would take a big performance for him. When I'm looking at the Pittsburgh and I'm thinking about now if I am counting in the weather, that kind of helps me like Warren more because he'll get more involved in the receiving game than Najee will.
I was also thinking on another game script where Warren makes a ton of sense is if you actually go heavier on the Cleveland side, something we often talk about. Like I think, once again, the most popular build tonight is going to be 4-2 Pittsburgh, second most popular 3-3. And I could see some 5-1 Pittsburgh stuff being not popular, but significantly more popular than what we usually see from 5-1. So I think going heavier on the Cleveland side definitely makes sense in this one. And part of that is because even with the weather, I think there's still a chance that we do see a ton of pass volume from Jameis Winston, at least more than what we typically see in these kinds of weather games. So I'm also noting Jerry Jeudy here, 12.7 optimal percent versus 8.4 projected captain ownership. So Prop, what are your thoughts on kind of flipping this build and going heavy on Cleveland?
I have no thoughts on Cleveland. I guess
they're a hard offense to be confident about. That's for sure.
I do like Njoku in this game. The receiving options is just this Steelers defense is just so tough.
It is.
I think they really do struggle with speed. So I'm not mad at Jeudy. It'll be between Jeudy and Njoku if I'm going with somebody on the Cleveland side besides the running backs.
One thing we haven't mentioned with Pickens straight away, although we've kind of talked about it indirectly, we can also remember that the DVOA adjusted fantasy points against data, share it here, plus 23% for opposing wide receiver ones. It's the only positive matchup for the entire offense, quarterbacks excluded. Pittsburgh, you can just see like they are just tough across the board, somewhat neutral for running backs and tight ends, somewhat neutral for wide receiver twos, wide receiver threes. Wide receiver ones are having a very difficult time against Pittsburgh. So I believe that we are considering Jerry Jeudy the wide receiver one. I can quickly answer that officially.
Maybe Elijah is he Elijah Moore, wide receiver 3? I see 8%. He's been producing over the last couple of weeks too.
He has. He definitely has. So I think that's a very interesting call as one of the kind of just like easy value plays to fit into the lineup just to make some other stuff work. Let me check what his actual price is. $6,400. So it's not like he's, one of those basement bargain type guys, but certainly gives some savings over, Harrison Chubb, 9,200, 9,000, Jeudy, 8,000, Njoku, 76, Tillman, 7,000. And because Moore, Tillman, and Njoku are so close, just $1,200 separating them, I do think Elijah Moore could be one of those guys who really slips through the cracks. Also, you have Jalen Warren at $200 cheaper than Elijah Moore. He's going to be an easier click for most people. So Elijah could really end up being a contrarian kind of value play. What are your thoughts on Elijah Moore, TwoGun?
See, I really don't have a strong opinion on any of these wide receivers of the Browns. To me, they're all kind of the same, and I don't really like any of them that much. I'm going to end up using one of them because of my bills, but it's just not. If you look at our DVOA data, like quarterback is who the Steelers are the hardest on in terms of fantasy points. So it's like I like this Cleveland run game. I actually kind of like Jerome Ford and having Nick Chubb in the same line. Like, I don't think it's one or the other.
I like that call. Would you be using the Browns defense in that build?
Probably. Before I tell you my entire lineup, but probably.
Well, that's a perfect segue because I want to talk some now about some of these values. You see the Steelers defense, $5,400, getting the elevated treatment. Like whenever a defense gets vaulted over the kickers in pricing, you know that it's a pretty lopsided game, at least by the spread. Then you get the two kickers, Boswell and Hopkins, 5,000, 4,800. I think those are going to be fairly popular values, especially Boswell, given just how many damn field goals he's making a game, 13 fantasy points per game. Like, let's, for comparison's sake, that's more than Njoku. That's more than Jerry Jeudy. It's almost as much as Najee Harris is averaging per game. It's almost as much as George Pickens is averaging per game. So Boswell probably going to be popular. But then you get Jerome Ford, the Cleveland Browns defense, and then Freiermuth, Mike Williams, Van Jefferson, Darnell Washington, Calvin Austin. So I'll kick it to you here, Prop. Who do you like here in this value range? Just as number one, you maybe just expect them to pay off their price tag, and number two, maybe you think they're going to be a little bit under-owned tonight.
I'll go forward.
My son kind of in here.
Only got
background. We got a little TwoGun Junior. Sorry, go ahead, Prop.
I'm sorry.
I'm gonna mute myself.
You talking about the guys that are listed right here?
Yeah.
I'm never mad at Darnell Washington, but he doesn't do enough to produce for a lineup.
He would probably need a touchdown, right? I mean, he's getting some targets and he's actually making some big plays, particularly on play action, but he's one of those needs to score or he's not going to be in the optimal lineup for sure.
Yeah, I think he's going to continue to be like a longer reception type guy.
Mm-hmm.
And speaking of like the red zone, Russell Wilson has been horrendous in the red zone. I really wish we can get Justin Fields into lineups because I feel like tonight, of all nights, is a perfect night to get him involved. He averaged 8 yards a carry. Yeah. And I think he can score. Oh, is he available? 9,800 for a quarterback too?
Yeah, he's priced like DraftKings was just being prepared for the surprise Russell Wilson scratch. And 99% of the time, I think that's the correct way to price it because otherwise we have no interest whatsoever in a backup quarterback. But I like this call. Like this is one of the rare times where we could have made a really contrarian call that, hey, what if Fields has a red zone package and has a Taysom Hill like 4 carries, 15 yards, 2 touchdowns, and now he's awful. So yeah, that would have been a really, really cool call. I don't think we can do it at $9,800 though.
Nah. So let's just go with Ford for me then. Of the guys that you show, I'm not mad at Boswell either. I think he has more fantasy points than any tight end in the league this season. Is that right? Besides Bowers or something?
I mean, he's like 13 fantasy points per game is insane. So I also think like you mentioned the struggles that Pittsburgh has had in the red zone. One thing you can do is say, okay, well, if they don't struggle in the red zone tonight, who's scoring those touchdowns? And you can use those guys instead of Boswell. So maybe that's Freiermuth. Maybe it's Pickens catches 2 from outside. Maybe you do go to Najee Harris and you just say, what if they score 21 points, right? And you get all of the touchdowns. They don't kick a field goal. Boswell fails at a pretty popular ownership for people. And you could also say, like, I think in that regard, Freiermuth and Mike Williams make a lot of sense because to me, those are the 2 guys down here as a value who not only could score taking points from Boswell, but now you're like actually getting a value play who can, because they're scoring a touchdown now, actually beat Boswell and do so at lower ownership and, of course, at a cheaper price tag. So I think that's a cool thing to keep in mind as well. But I like the Ford call. And then the last thing I'll say for values, Cleveland Brown defense, I think makes plenty of sense as well, where as TwoGun was talking about, like, what if Cleveland just actually has the upper hand in this game? We haven't seen Pittsburgh have to come from behind. They might have a much tougher time doing that than playing the type of games that they have played to this point, at least with Russell Wilson. So we could see, we saw an absolute boneheaded red zone interception last week from Russell Wilson. It's not like he's immune to dumb plays. He takes some sacks, so the Browns could score a decent amount. TwoGun, I see you're still muted, but I don't know if you feel like you can join the conversation again. But
he's focused on the crazy taxi machine now.
Perfect.
He got loose. I don't know what happened. TwoGun Junior, everybody. Let's see. In general, I don't like kickers in this game. I feel like the one thing the weather is going to affect more than anything are actually the kickers, right?
Yeah.
Now, Boswell's such a stud that I get it. Like people wanting to use him. Mm-hmm. Hopkins, no thanks. But yeah, I like. It's funny because I think the Browns defense will get underused and the Steelers defense will get overused, even though again it's a 3.5 point favorite. It's just
I think you're right, and I would say the 2 things that typically get affected the most with weather are pass rates. So not so much pass efficiency, just pass rates. Teams do like to run the ball more, and then kicking. It's not just that kicking becomes harder, but it all same idea. It influences coaches' decisions. Teams are a little bit more likely to go for it on a 4th and 2 or a 4th and 1, something like that.
Especially in that 50-yard range.
Yeah,
there's been so many 56-yard field goals, and that's like a nice 5 points.
Yeah.
If they're 4th and 8 at the 15-yard line, they're going to kick the field goal, and he's probably going to make it. But if it's 4th and 4 at the 34, they're going for it. They're not going to kick the field goal, I think. I definitely with Browns. I mean, I don't know. I don't know the coaching. I haven't looked at like Tomlin's and what the Browns do. That's something that's probably smart thing to do if you're really thinking about using the kickers. I'm just not going there.
Yeah, I agree with you there. Any closing thoughts here, PropGod? I know this is a bit of a quicker show than we're used to, but there's not as much to talk about with such a potentially uneventful game.
Nothing else. I think we covered everything. I like Ford and Warren. I think the weather will permit them to be involved in the receiving game. Not mad at Pickens. Yeah, I think it's clear. It's kind of cut and dry. What's going on with this one? I don't think you have to overthink it at all. The only thing that I would add is I do like some action on Fields. Hopefully we can get some live lines or something like that. But I do think just for the click, we'll be able to clip this once he scores or something tonight. That we were on it. You know, let's just use that. I think he'll have about 20 rushing yards tonight and a touchdown.
Have you found any rushing props for him or touchdown props?
No, I've looked on all the DFS apps. DraftKings messaged someone on Twitter and told them that they decided not to offer him. That's kind of weird, especially when you see him get active. So I think this is probably the week where the package is, you know, on display.
Yeah, I think it's a great call. Prop for president. If Fields scores the touchdown, prop for president indeed. So
yes, sir.
Yeah, I love this call. I'm going to be looking for that with you because it's one of those just where like the projections, nobody's going to be projecting that for him. So if you're just looking at projections, you're never going to land on a Fields touchdown. That makes it harder for books to set lines on, which is probably why we don't have them yet. But every now and then, just thinking about the game from a football perspective can really help out. And this seems like one of those. Speaking of, if you guys really enjoy the type of analysis that we do on this show, talking about, you know, the explosive plays loud, things like that, I did an entire show worth of it. Main slate matchups that came out last night. So go check that out on the FTN YouTube channel. You can also find it through the FTN Fantasy Twitter account or my Twitter account at AlexBlickle1. Any closing thoughts from you, TwoGun?
No, I think we covered it pretty well. I think I pretty much gave away what my strategy and my thoughts are. So, and I'll post in the Discord in a few minutes the break, the captain and the numbers of different teams on my two lineups.
Love it. And guys, stay tuned because big week of content coming up with obviously the big Thanksgiving Day slate of football games and a huge, really exciting announcement coming. I can't give too many details on it. I know a lot of our guys in the NFL Discord were trying to guess what it was yesterday. Nobody's guessed it yet. So some really exciting stuff coming. Stay tuned for that. Thanks, everybody. We will catch you next time. And we will have a special show next Wednesday talking about the Thanksgiving stuff. So we won't have our usual Thursday show. It will be Wednesday.